Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining the virtual launch of ARENA's investment plan. I'll begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'm Skarbek, and I'm CEO of ClimateWorks Australia, and today I'm your host, and very pleased to be supporting ARENA in the launch of its investment plan. My organisation, ClimateWorks, has worked closely with ARENA for many years, and recently that has included establishing and now delivering the Australian Industry Energy Transitions Initiative, a platform for Australia's emissions-intensive industry and related businesses to coordinate learning and action on net zero emissions supply chains by 2050. Early ARENA support was critical from the very early stages of project ideation through to supporting the consortium's ability to convene and resource it. And the initiative is now well and truly underway, and it convenes a critical mass of the Australian industrial economy, with 16 ASX listed partners representing around a quarter of the ASX 100 index by market capitalisation. And it's undertaking the research, engagement and implementation efforts to support Australian industry to realise the opportunities of a decarbonised global economy, to collectively develop pathways and actions toward achieving net zero emissions in critical supply chains. And ARENA continues to be an essential funder of this work, and more than a funder. The support has extended beyond just funding and includes ARENA's skilled staff providing input into the strategic direction and focus of the initiative, the early concept development, ongoing role in program committee, knowledge sharing, technical input into research. A really terrific collaboration and a great demonstration of ARENA's skills and offerings for these important issues. And we know that the shifts required for Australia to remain globally competitive through this transition are complex by nature, and it will require significant investment, leadership and transformation of the energy system. For Australia to be positioned as a global leader in the energy transition, we'll need to see a substantial increase in the scale, connectivity, coordination and number of projects. And efforts to improve the competitiveness and increase the supply of renewable energy will be essential to this, which is why ARENA is so important to our work and to Australia's broader energy transition. So it's terrific today to be here to learn much more about ARENA's new investment plan. So I'll move to the proceedings for today. Firstly, with some housekeeping. You can download and read ARENA's investment plan on the web page through which you're listening to this webinar, and it will be available on ARENA's website too. Following the speeches, I'll be holding a Q&A session with ARENA CEO Darren Miller. If you would like to ask a question for that session, you can submit your question in writing. Just click the blue raise hand icon in the top right of your screen. We will be collating those questions to ask at the end. And we will also be recording this event, so if you can't stay, it will be posted on ARENA's website. We're aiming to wrap up right on 1 o'clock, but if we get a lot of questions, we might run a little over. So firstly, we're going to hear from the ARENA chair, Mr. Justin Punch. And I'm very pleased to introduce Justin, who's an experienced environmental investor focused on decarbonisation and conservation, with a 30-year career in private equity, line management and management consulting. He was appointed chair of the ARENA board in July 2019. As a flavour of his extensive background, He's a co-founder of Assembly Climate Capital. He's a director of Tasman Environmental Markets, and he's a co-founder of biodiversity offset provider, Ministerial. He was also previously a partner at Archer Capital, where he led investments across a diverse range of sectors and has extensive experience in the management of operating businesses, as well as consulting experience with Boston Consulting Group. And he serves as the chairman of the Karkad Trust, supporting the work of Indigenous ranger groups in Arnhem Land. So I'm delighted to hand to you, Justin, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Anna. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us today. A great pleasure indeed. We are today still in the early stages of the critical decade where we must break the back of the decarbonisation challenge if we are to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. The refunding of ARENA late last year was timely, providing funding certainty for the agency for this key decade. And it presented the opportunity for us to refresh ARENA's mission and strategy. The result of this work by Darren and his team is encapsulated in ARENA's new investment plan. It's a high quality plan, I believe, intellectually tight, focused on the key levers, high impact. Of course, strategy always needs to be dynamic, no more so than in this area, which is developing at such a ferocious pace. So we do have eyes on topics beyond this plan, and our areas of focus will continue to evolve over time, but this is our view of the world as we stand here today. As part of this work, we've considered our mission statement, the key objective ARENA is trying to solve for. I won't steal Darren's thunder on this, but there is important perspective in this piece. This is a global problem we're trying to solve. We must work towards global outcomes, whilst also delivering abatement and economic benefits to Australia. One of the exciting initiatives to come out of the review is the need to refocus on ultra low-cost solar. Australia's been pivotal in getting the cost and efficiency of solar panels to where they are today. This job is not finished, however, and there remains much that needs to be achieved in this area, particularly if we're to successfully decarbonise the hard-to-abate industrial sectors. Solar technology, perhaps more than any other area, encapsulates what can be achieved here in Australia with high-quality technological development to the benefit of both us as well as the wider world. In this regard, I'd like to take a moment to welcome Vince and David from solar tech firm and ARENA grantee SunDrive. Darren will provide more information about SunDrive's recent achievements, but they are remarkable. A special mention as well to Mike Cannon-Brooks and to Blackbird Ventures for their early and visionary support of this wonderful young company. ARENA is an interesting organisation. It's government sector, but with many private sector characteristics. Part grant maker, part venture investor, part technology guardian, part knowledge disseminator. Its job, in a nutshell, is to make the decarbonisation process happen more quickly than it otherwise would. It has a compelling combination of capability and purpose, and is very well placed to be the government's key delivery agency in driving technical and commercial innovation across the renewable energy and low emission sector. I'd like to thank the entire ARENA team, including my fellow board members, for the quality of the work they do day in, day out in driving so much of Australia's mission-critical technological decarbonisation work. I'd particularly like to thank Darren for his leadership of ARENA through the past 3 years. It's been a time of some uncertainty, and he's done an outstanding job of keeping ARENA focused on continuing to achieve its outcomes in the highest quality way through this period. ARENA is fortunate indeed to have someone of his intellect and professionalism. I'd also like to thank all of the participants on this call. In one way or another, you have devoted yourselves to this decarbonisation challenge. I'm personally moved and also extremely energised by the scale of your collective commitment. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the Minister for Energy and Emission Reduction, Angus Taylor. Minister Taylor successfully guided the refunding of ARENA through Cabinet, and I want to thank him for his work in achieving this outcome and for his support for ARENA more generally. In addition, he's realising his vision for a clear set of national technological priorities through the Technology Investment Roadmap and the publishing of annual low emissions technology statements. Few, if any, governments around the world have set their technological priorities so clearly. ARENA has been heavily involved over this past year in the development of the second LETS, and the LETS priorities have, of course, been a significant consideration in ARENA's new investment plan. So my thanks again to you all for coming along today, and back to you, Anna.
Thank you, Justin. And you mentioned indeed Minister Taylor, and he is the next speaker I would like to introduce, Federal Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction, Honourable Angus Taylor MP. Unfortunately, Minister Taylor had hoped to join this event live, but he's been called away. So yesterday he provided a pre-recorded address for us to play now. I'm sure he's well known to this audience. You would know he was elected to the Federal Parliament in September 2013 as the member for Hume, and Minister Taylor has served as the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction since 2019. And as Justin mentioned, Minister Taylor has led the development of the Australian Government's Low Emissions Technology Roadmap, which was released last year, and the statements which follow it. So we will now hear from Minister Taylor.
Hello, and thanks Justin and Darren for the opportunity to address all of you today. Before I talk about our vision for ARENA, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work and leadership provided by Justin as Chair, other members of the board, and of course Darren as CEO. Justin's a member of the Technology Investment Advisory Council, the group advising on the preparation of the annual low emissions technology statements led by Alan Finkel. And I see ARENA's representation on that body, together with the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the Clean Energy Regulator, is very important. He's making a great contribution to the ongoing development and refinement of the government's technology roadmap, with the second annual statement due for release shortly. Now, together with the other members of the board and Darren, who was recently reappointed as CEO, they're leading the agency into a new era. Darren has done an outstanding job as Chief Executive since his appointment in 2018, and I know he'll continue to do that as ARENA expands into new sectors and opportunities in coming years. The launch of ARENA's new investment plan is an important milestone for the agency. The strategic vision and commitments made in the first Technology Investment Roadmap statement and in the 2020 budget are now being operationalised. ARENA has a particularly important role to play in the government's technology, not taxes, emissions reduction agenda, because innovation and problem solving are the key to getting new energy technologies to parity and getting more horses in the race. That's why I recently enacted regulations to expand ARENA's mandate, enabling the agency to work across new sectors and technologies. The urgent challenge of materially reducing global emissions demands that we take a portfolio approach. There's no silver bullet, and restricting ourselves from exploring opportunities for innovation will limit our and the world's prospects for success. Which is why it's so important that ARENA takes the expertise and learnings earned through supporting more than 600 clean energy projects since 2012 to the next frontiers of hydrogen, low emissions materials, CCS and soil carbon. Alongside ARENA's important contribution to driving Australian innovation and breakthroughs in technology, we're making efforts to build voluntary markets, put in place incentives and provide other enablers to accelerate uptake. Just two examples of this include the CFC, an agency with the express mandate of helping the private sector understand how to finance new technologies and business models, and the Emissions Reduction Fund, which credits emissions reductions and helps near commercial technologies enter the market. This is important work, but we're here today to celebrate the particularly important work of ARENA and your annual investment statement. Congratulations on the great work you're doing. I look forward to seeing more of it over the next 12 months.
And thank you very much to the Minister for those words. It's now my pleasure to introduce Daniel Westerman, the newly appointed CEO and Managing Director of AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator. Daniel's a chartered engineer and skilled business leader with significant experience in the energy sector, and he joined AEMO in May this year. Prior to joining AEMO, Daniel held a variety of senior executive roles including with the London-listed electricity and gas utility National Grid plc. And most recently, he served as their Chief Transformation Officer and President of Renewable Energy, where he led the company-wide transformation program and grew a large-scale renewable energy business in the United States. In previous roles, he's been responsible for engineering, planning and operational control of the electricity transmission network across Great Britain, as well as the development of distributed energy systems such as rooftop solar, storage and energy metering. And prior to joining National Grid, he held positions with McKinsey & Co, which is where I first met him, and also with Ford Australia. We're very fortunate today to be able to hear from Daniel, and so it's over to you.
Well, thank you, Anna, for the kind introduction. And let me just begin by acknowledging that I'm on the lands of the Bunurong people, and I'd like to acknowledge them as the traditional owners, pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to all First Nations people with us today. I'd like to thank everyone for being on the call and being part of this online launch for ARENA today. Well, it's coming up to 4 months for me in the job as AEMO's Chief Executive, and I can see that Australia's energy transition is not slowing down for anyone or anything, not even this frustrating Delta variant that we're all dealing with. And that means for AEMO, as the real-time system and market operator for Australia, there's just no let-up in the challenges of managing the energy system as it continues to transform at such a rapid pace. We've just released one of our flagship reports, the Electricity Statement of Opportunities. And I thought it might be helpful just to reference some of our key insights and findings in my remarks just now. The report takes a 10-year look into the future to assess the adequacy of electricity supply, emerging trends, and what effects they might have on the future composition of Australia's power system. The backdrop to these key insights, of course, is that we're seeing the transformation of energy supply and demand at the fastest rate we've ever seen in the NEM, driven, as you know, by increasing decarbonisation and decentralisation of the power generation mix. So some insights. Firstly, you'll be glad to know that the report confirms we have enough electricity supply in the short term, so for this summer and over the next 5 years, with an additional 4.4 gigawatts of new supply coming online, half by this summer and half over the years ahead. Beyond that, it gets more complex. Most critical energy transition developments will occur in the next 5 to 10 years as more inverter-based resources come online and older synchronous generators, coal generators, progressively retire. Our report reveals that the operating of the NEM and relying on coal generation, the risks are increasing quickly due to early plant retirements and declining reliability. We know that while plant owners continue to make improvements to help with reliability over the next few years, the long-term trend of decreasing reliabilities as these generators age is just part of the reality that we need to navigate. But by contrast, we're seeing a 25% average year-on-year growth in rooftop solar PV generation over the past 5 years. And with about 14 gigawatts of installed capacity just now, the continued investment in residential rooftop solar PV means it's already the largest generator in the NEM. And with a further 9 gigawatts of commercial and residential solar PV expected to be installed by 2025 in the mainland NEM states. This means that these rooftop systems alone could supply up to 77% of total electricity demand at times by 2026. And there are parts of Australia that are already spearheading this challenge, with Western Australia generating 62% of total demand from rooftop solar just last weekend. Commercial developers are also proposing 97 gigawatts of new generation projects. That's about double today's capacity of the NEM and includes 46 gigawatts of wind, 33 gigawatts of solar and 10 gigawatts of hydro. Of course, not all of those will end up as operational projects, but those that do will go a long way to replacing our old and retiring generation fleet. And operationally, AEMO is seeing instantaneous wind and solar penetrations increasing year on year from 35% in 2018 to peaks of over 50% last year in the NEM. And on the 22nd of August this year, we saw a new record for the instantaneous renewable penetration. So for a half hour in the middle of the day, over 57% of total generation came from renewables. And we're going to see this record consistently broken over the years ahead. And our base forecast is now that we'll have periods of 100% instantaneous penetration of renewables by 2025. That's not an outlying scenario, but that's the base case that we're actually working off. 100% for half-hour periods in just 3.5 years' time. So that's the objective. We've got to collaboratively work together towards engineering grids that can handle periods of 100% instantaneous renewables penetration by 2025. Now, AEMO's recent engineering framework white paper is really helping the industry taking a step forward together and identify some of the many challenges that we'll need to work through to achieve that. One is called a phenomenon of minimum demand. So essentially, the lower the demand, the harder it is to operate the system securely and reliably. It's like riding a bike really slowly at those times. And the ongoing adoption of rooftop solar means that these points of minimum demand on the network will continue to decline quite rapidly. In fact, in the mainland NEM, we're expected to drop from current minimums of around 14 or 15 gigawatts to minimums of about 4 to 6 by 2025. And that brings a suite of system stability and security operating challenges for the grid. On the flip side, though, some of our scenarios highlight that we could see demand for electricity increase rapidly due to low-cost, low-carbon renewable energy, spurring society to trade petrol cars for EVs, re-engineering gas-fired industrial processes to electrical ones. Low-cost, low-carbon renewable energy could also drive a new hydrogen industry for Australia. So we've got to be ready for that too. So that brings me to how we're going to be ready. When I started as CEO in May, I asked our stakeholders, so industry, governments, consumer groups and regulators, for their reflections on AEMO and what they wanted to see from us. Our stakeholders want AEMO to be more open, more transparent and more consultative and collaborative. They want AEMO to prioritise our core role as the system and market operator and national planner, but also to partner on potential solutions and challenges to today's grid and markets to smooth that energy transition that's underway. So that stakeholder feedback, together with our own internal feedback, shaped AEMO's corporate plan for 2022 and our 4 strategic priorities. The first around operating today's energy markets and systems, as you'd expect, a foundation priority for us. The second being navigating the energy future to deliver least cost and lowest risk outcomes for consumers. Then about becoming more open, transparent and collaborative. It's reflected in our third priority of engaging our stakeholders. And finally, evolving the way we work, just to build good business basics in AEMO. These are really important priorities for us, but I want to touch on 2 of them that I know are important for you and for our relationship at ARENA. Navigating the energy transition and how we engage. Because the complex nature of our energy transition means that this engineering challenge is too big for any one person or one organisation to solve. It really is a shared task, and that's why we're here together today. In fact, it's going to require a high degree of commitment and cooperation across industry, governments, consumer representatives and regulators. And it's the type of collaboration that I see when in industry there's an emergency and we're all really focused on safely removing the threat and returning customers to secure, reliable energy as they expect. I think there are some great examples of where AEMO and ARENA are working together really well to enable the energy transition, sharing best technical knowledge and identifying the areas of focus that will help us get to low emissions as quickly as possible. Take, for example, our virtual power plant demonstrations, a topic that's actually really close to my heart. The project saw 8 VPPs participating, totaling 31 megawatts across every mainland state and involving 7,000 customers. And the knowledge sharing is incredibly valuable. There's the Project Edge trial to develop a model for trading of electricity and grid services from distributed energy resources like rooftop solar that could be expanded across the NEM. And then there's the Distributed Energy Integration Program, and that's a demand response initiative to free up temporary supply during extreme weather and unplanned outages. And all of these projects are really great examples of how I want AEMO to work closely and collaboratively with governments, industry, communities, and bodies like ARENA to design affordable, reliable energy systems that Australia needs. So let me wrap up where I started. ARENA is just doing such a wonderful thing for Australia to look over the horizon and see what's coming in Australia's energy transition. The projects that ARENA supports play an absolutely critical role in enabling the integration of high renewable systems and, importantly, ensuring customers are at the heart of the benefits. And in the transition, AEMO has a really big job to do, even just in the 4 priorities that I outlined, and we can only do it by working in a very different way. So I'm looking forward to working together collaboratively into the future. Thank you, Anna.
Well, thank you, Daniel. It's great to have you back home and in this important role, and thank you for sharing AEMO's outlook with this audience for ARENA. And so now I'm pleased to introduce ARENA CEO, Darren Miller, who will present to us the new ARENA investment plan. I'm sure you know Darren well. He's led ARENA for the last 3 years, and as the agency has been renewed for a further decade with $1.62 billion in funding. And during his tenure, ARENA has broadened its focus from electricity, investing in hydrogen and hard-to-abate sectors, as well as supporting the integration of distributed energy, utility-scale batteries and EVs. Darren has more than 25 years' experience across a range of sectors, including renewable energy, electricity retail, technology, finance, media and entertainment. And prior to being appointed to ARENA, Darren was the co-founder and CEO of Mojo Power, an innovative electricity retailer. And as you heard from the Minister, Darren was recently reappointed as ARENA CEO for a further 3 years. Darren, we're looking forward to your presentation today.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. Thank you to Daniel for joining us. Thank you, Justin, for your very kind words, and to Minister Taylor as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time today. Australia is blessed with all the ingredients needed to succeed in the transition to net zero emissions. We have an abundance of iron ore, bauxite, copper, lithium, cobalt and nickel. These are the building blocks for the solar panels, wind turbines, batteries and electric vehicles that are needed for our net zero future. We are also blessed with an abundance of land, sun and wind, the other raw ingredients that are needed for us to deploy the technologies that will transform our energy systems. So abundant are our natural resources that not only can we solve our emissions challenge, but we have the opportunity to supply the world with a significant portion of the low or zero emissions energy products that it needs. And finally, we have all the skills, experience and trusted trading relationships that will be crucial if we are to execute on this potential and be a major player in the future net zero energy system, just as we are today in a world still dominated by fossil fuels. Friends, what we lack though is the most important commodity of all, time itself. We are running out of time to make the changes needed to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And we need to act quickly and decisively if we are to take advantage of the immense economic opportunities that the shift to net zero presents. And so I would like to acknowledge and thank you for your time today, and indeed the time you're taking and spending in your careers to the energy transition. ARENA was established 9 years ago with the goal of improving the competitiveness and increasing the supply of renewable energy in Australia. To date, we have committed almost $1.8 billion to over 600 projects throughout Australia, and we have drawn in over $3 of third-party funding for every dollar of Commonwealth funding committed. Through our funding and knowledge sharing, we have been instrumental in advancing the technical and commercial readiness of key renewable energy technologies such as solar photovoltaics, lithium-ion batteries, distributed energy resources, green hydrogen production, electric vehicle recharging, and many other technologies. The International Energy Agency stated recently that solar PV is now the cheapest source of electricity in history, and this is in no small part due to the important work done right here in Australia and funded by ARENA. Australian researchers, led by Professor Martin Green and countless others, have led the world in solar photovoltaic research for decades now. The PERC cell technology, invented and perfected in the labs of our universities, are now deployed in over 80% of solar modules produced today. And just this week, as Justin mentioned, SunDrive, an Australian startup run by 2 UNSW graduates and supported by ARENA, announced that they have broken the world efficiency record for a full area commercial size silicon solar cell. What an amazing result, and well done to you, Vince and David. With almost 25% of households having installed solar, Australia leads the world in its uptake of rooftop solar. And the last few years have seen increasing amounts of solar, large-scale solar and wind deployed and committed throughout Australia. Last year, the government released the first low emissions technology statement and allocated an additional $1.62 billion to ARENA to invest in over the next 10 years on the next generation of low emissions technologies. As we come to the end of our legislated funding and start to commit our new funds, we have taken the time to assess what emissions reduction technologies and themes most need our support. And this is what I'd like to talk to you about today. ARENA's mission for the years ahead is to support the global transition to net zero emissions. We will do this by accelerating the pace of pre-commercial innovation, and we want to ensure that the shift is to the benefit of Australian businesses, households, workers, and the environment. Our mission has these 3 key elements. Firstly, our ambition and the lens through which we assess our potential impact is global. Australia's domestic emissions at 500 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per annum are around 1% of global emissions. We are responsible for getting these emissions to net zero. However, we are also a major exporter of energy products, most notably coal and gas, where the bulk of the emissions occur overseas. As the world seeks to decarbonise, low emissions alternatives will be sought, and we have the opportunity to be a major exporter of renewable energy and low emissions technology. We must look towards the future and assess what products and services the world needs in its journey to net zero. Australian research and development and the deployment at scale of solar, wind, hydrogen, and low emissions products represent an enormous economic opportunity and an export opportunity. Secondly, technology and commercial innovation is the key to unlocking this opportunity. We must reduce the costs and increase the capabilities of renewable energy and low emissions technologies so that they outcompete the incumbent technologies throughout the whole economy. But it is this idea of acceleration that is fundamental to ARENA's mission. Australia could sit back and wait for the world to develop the solutions needed, but we choose to lean in and lead to make things happen faster and position Australia for success. In doing so, we will see our efforts benefiting Australian industry, communities, households, and individuals. The benefits will be in the form of cheaper energy, new jobs, new businesses, new forms of exports, and of course through reduced emissions and a stable climate, as we join the rest of the world to achieve net zero in the decades ahead. I'd now like to turn to the technologies and investment themes that ARENA will prioritise. We are choosing to invest in 3 key areas: the electricity transition, clean hydrogen, and low emissions metals. We will also deliver the budget measures for which we received $193 million of funding in last year's federal budget. And we will explore opportunities to support new areas for ARENA, such as carbon capture and storage and soil carbon technologies. These themes have been chosen because of their importance to the global transition to net zero, their importance for Australia, and where ARENA's unique skills and funding model are best suited to making a difference. Electricity is the first and in some ways the most important sector to decarbonise. It's the first sector because we know what the solution is. We are well on our way to replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy from solar and wind. Currently, around 1/3 of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions comes from the electricity sector, and so it's important due to its carbon footprint. It's also important because electricity is an extremely efficient form of energy and a realistic solution for many end users, like heating and cooling our buildings, hot water, cooking, and transport. Natural gas, diesel, and petrol can all be replaced with electricity for these end users. And so electricity is a key pathway to unlock emissions reductions throughout the economy. Renewable energy now makes up over 25% of annual supply in the national electricity market. Solar and wind are low cost and mature technologies, and we now need to deploy these technologies at scale and at pace as we head towards a 100% renewable grid. But as we attempt to increase the penetration of renewables, a number of challenges emerge if we are to retain a low cost and highly reliable system. It is these challenges that ARENA is focused on. We are focused on optimizing the integration of large-scale renewable energy into the electricity system. Solar and wind have different operating characteristics compared to traditional generation from coal, gas, and hydro. There are technical, commercial, and regulatory challenges to be solved if we are to operate our system with a very high share of renewables. Within this theme of integration, we're particularly interested in the role that advanced inverters can play in keeping the system operating safely and securely, and we are working closely with the likes of AEMO, industry bodies, and project developers to trial and perfect this technology. We need to solve the challenge of cost-effective energy storage. Solar and wind are by their very nature variable. They do not necessarily produce electricity when it is needed, and so our future system needs a lot more storage to absorb this low-cost renewable energy when it is available and dispatch that energy to our homes, businesses, and industries when it is needed. ARENA is looking to support a variety of storage technologies. Lithium-ion batteries continue to make good progress for short-duration dispatchable energy, but other prospective technologies like flow batteries, pumped hydro, thermal storage, compressed air, and new electrochemical technologies may all have an important role to play. We see it as ARENA's job to create options for the future, and so we're looking to progress a range of technologies which together can solve the energy storage challenge that is coming. We are looking to support projects that demonstrate the benefits of flexible demand. Demand flexibility is the idea of shifting when we use electricity to when supply is available. Our current system largely takes demand as a given, and supply is required to respond to the peaks and troughs in this demand profile. Our future system would benefit tremendously if instead demand could adapt to only require energy when solar and wind are available and abundant. We are interested in a range of novel, flexible demand options, including managed charging of electric vehicles, coordination of distributed energy resources, flexible operation of hydrogen electrolyzers, and other load-shifting technologies in industrial, commercial, and residential settings. And finally, within our electricity priority, we want to support innovation that can deliver ultra-low cost generation. Solar and wind are now mature technologies, and both can deliver bulk energy at costs low enough to justify their deployment at scale. However, many of the harder to abate sectors need electricity at even cheaper rates than is possible with today's technology. In particular, the cost of green hydrogen, which I will talk about in a minute, will require renewable electricity at around half of current costs to achieve the H2 under 2 goal that the government has set. For this reason, ARENA is focusing on step change innovations in solar PV. We are aiming for 30% module efficiency, up from around 22% today in today's commercially available and widely used modules. We want to see the installed cost of large-scale solar come down from over $1 per watt today to around 30 cents per watt in the future, representing a 70% cost reduction. And we want to see all of this happen by 2030. If we can achieve these targets, solar will literally be dirt cheap, perhaps as low as $15 a megawatt hour, representing a significant overall reduction from today's levels of $50 a megawatt hour and above. We are calling our goal Solar 30-30-30, 30% module efficiency at 30 cents per watt installed by 2030. And we are asking researchers and industry to get behind this target to drive this important technology to the next level. ARENA has been leading the push into renewable hydrogen for around 3 years now. To date, we have committed $60 million to around 30 hydrogen projects. And in May, we announced another $103 million to our 3 chosen large-scale electrolyzer projects. And we're not done yet. Clean hydrogen is an emerging solution for end users that are not suited to electrification. Hydrogen and its derivatives, such as ammonia, can be combusted to produce heat, used as a chemical feedstock, stored for long periods, and transported long distances. Clean hydrogen is viewed as a key enabler of industrial decarbonisation, including in the manufacturing of green steel, and it represents a potentially significant export opportunity to countries like Japan and South Korea, which have firm net zero commitments, but lack the capacity to produce all the renewable energy their economies need. For the last few years, we've been supporting industry to reduce emissions. We are now sharpening our focus to accelerate the decarbonisation of the aluminium and steel industries. The production of steel and aluminium is highly energy and emissions intensive, accounting for around 10% of global emissions. Australia is a major exporter of iron ore, bauxite, and a producer and exporter of alumina. These are the minerals that go into producing steel and aluminium, and we are keenly interested in the decarbonisation pathways these two products will take. In both cases, we are looking to support research and development and demonstration and deployment projects throughout the value chain, from the mines to the refineries where the ores are upgraded, to the smelters and the factories where the end products are made. Beyond our clear focus on the key areas of electricity, hydrogen, and low emissions metals, we are investigating opportunities in carbon capture and storage and soil carbon technologies. Capturing emissions from industrial processes and taking carbon out of the atmosphere will become increasingly important as we seek to achieve net zero. In fact, the whole idea of net zero implies that it will be hard to achieve zero emissions in an absolute sense. These areas are new for ARENA, and we'll be consulting with industry and researchers to develop our approach to supporting projects. Getting to net zero in the decades ahead will no doubt be a big challenge, but I would argue that net zero presents an incredible opportunity for Australia to succeed in a future decarbonised world, just as it has in the age of fossil fuels. To succeed, we must accelerate the deployment of the things we have answers for: solar, wind, lithium-ion batteries, and EVs. These are all proven and available technologies. Costs will continue to come down, and integration challenges need to be solved as we make progress, but nothing should stand in the way of these technologies being deployed at scale and at pace. There are still technologies and sectors where decarbonisation will be hard and expensive. The commercialisation of clean hydrogen, the production of green steel and aluminium, solving long-distance transport, reducing methane emissions, the manufacturing of zero-carbon plastics and cement will all take longer and be costly. Solving these areas will require ingenuity and investment, collaboration and commitment. But this is where the opportunity lies for Australia to use its vast landmass and excellent solar and wind resources to be a supplier of renewable energy to the world. And ARENA's strategic priorities have been designed to capitalise on this opportunity. We must act with urgency to take advantage of the immense opportunity to lead the way towards net zero. Thank you all for your valuable time today. Back to you, Anna.
Well, thank you, Darren. It's great to hear your bold goals and your clear focus on them. I love the solar 30-30-30 that goal. Thank you very much for the description of that. And you've outlined many key priority technologies and the clear logic behind them. So we've got a bunch of questions about the overall strategy and about the technologies themselves. So I'm looking forward to jumping in now to this Q&A with you. And first off, a question certainly close to my heart at ClimateWorks. You mentioned in your speech that we're running out of time from the climate perspective. And of course, you've mentioned ARENA's role is about accelerating innovation, and you spoke about the global opportunity for Australia as we move to net zero. So in your view, what are the signs that the transition is speeding up? And do you think we can get there?
Yeah, I mean, there's clear signs, Anna, as you know, in terms of just the cost reductions that we see from some of the key technologies. I mean, solar module costs have come down 89% over the 10 years from 2010 to 2020. This is just an incredible step change that, frankly, nobody nobody in the industry could even have predicted 10 years ago. So I think that this focus on technology gives me great hope that as we progress and we innovate and we achieve success, those successes get baked in, those cost reductions get locked in. Technology doesn't get more expensive over time, certainly over any reasonable time horizon. It just gets cheaper and better and easier to scale. It's completely different to natural resources like gas and coal, and even trying to build pumped hydro, which these things get harder over time because the sites that are available become scarcer, more distant, deeper underground. Technology holds that unbelievable solution that things get cheaper, faster, better. And we've seen that in the semiconductor industry with computing, and it's being demonstrated in the energy system with solar, wind, batteries, and electric vehicles. So that's what gives me hope that we're not out of time, that we still have what it takes to get on top of this immensely difficult challenge of reducing emissions and mitigating climate change.
Terrific. Well, let's tap into that hope about the technologies and hear about some of them. So you outlined the priority technologies and the clear logic behind them. There's been some questions around, can you tell us how you'll be dividing the funding between these priorities? Are they equally important? Will some areas require more funding than others?
Yeah, so one thing we don't do is apportion our funding specifically to particular technologies. We need to be flexible. We need to see what the industry is ready and able to come forward with. As much as we might like to allocate a certain amount of funding to a certain technology in a certain amount of time, we're a service provider to industry, really. We're waiting for industry to come to us to take the lead in progressing these technologies, in putting their hand up to do something innovative. And we're ready and waiting with the full might of our funding potential, the $1.62 billion that we've got to allocate to that. Now, I'd love it if we could move faster, if we could get our funding out the door and get good projects underway as soon as possible, and go back to government and tell a story of success and potentially future need for what might be required to take the next bit of technology forward. But certainly I don't want to limit any particular industry, any technology from coming forward and being very bold about what support they need.
Thanks. Well, maybe we'll talk about some of the specific technologies because there's certainly been questions at that level as well. So let's talk about grid storage. ARENA has already funded a number of large battery projects. And what do you see as next for grid scale energy storage?
Yeah, so the storage is a very nuanced area. I mean, we need storage for all different timeframes, from the second, millisecond, microsecond kind of storage to balance the system, keep frequency and voltage on track. The things that Daniel and AEMO are so concerned about, running the system with 100% renewable energy in the next few years. So storage can help with those, seconds and minutes and hours of duration that are needed. We also then need storage for the nighttime. I mean, the sun, we can guarantee the sun is not going to be shining at night, and hopefully there'll be some wind available. But we obviously need to get ourselves, bridge from sort of 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. on a daily basis as solar and wind penetrate our grids. And then there's the storage that's going to be needed for those days and perhaps weeks when there's low sun and low wind but high energy demand. And we can see this kind of challenge emerging in northern hemisphere economies in particular because of the different weather conditions. I think we're a bit lucky in Australia, although we're sort of running quite fast on the transition. We can observe that the likes of Texas and even Great Britain at the moment, with their shortage of energy and the high gas prices, those are the challenges that we will encounter in a slightly different way in Australia. And I think what I would say about where we need to head is we need a variety of technologies. And that's what ARENA's view of the world is, that it's not going to be just one solution. We can't actually afford to back only one type of technology to solve the storage challenge. We need lithium ion, we're going to need flow batteries, we'll probably need a lot of solar thermal. We're working with the likes of Vast and Raygen in our portfolio who are looking at thermal technologies. Clearly, pumped hydro is going to have a role. But demand flexibility is the other solve for that as well. If we can become a bit more flexible about when we need to use energy, we may not need as much storage as we otherwise would. And that's why demand flexibility is an important theme for us as well.
Terrific, thank you. We might stay on, you mentioned solar, and again, we'll stay on solar and then we'll move to renewable hydrogen and some of the industrial technologies that you mentioned as well. So there was a question about the solar 30-30-30 goal, the big bold goal, and a sort of a technical question about what is the pathway to achieving a 30 cent per watt target in terms of plausible component cost reductions?
It's a great question, and I'd love people to join us on the journey of even thinking through and designing what is required. But fundamentally, to get to that end goal, which let's talk about the $15 a megawatt hour as being what you actually get at the end of all of that. So really, really cheap electricity. The solar aspect needs two key things to happen. Firstly, we need to improve the module efficiency by about, say, almost 50% from 22% in currently available commercial modules to that 30% target that we've identified. And if you think about what efficiency can do for you, it lets you amortize your costs in a much better way. You can spread for the same amount of energy, for the same amount of land, you can generate much more output and therefore lower your costs. So the efficiency goal, it's not just hubris or an intellectual desire to have higher efficiency. Higher efficiency drives the lower cost. It does the heavy lifting on getting you to that lower cost outcome. The second element beyond the efficiency goal is about innovation in the field. How do we engineer our solar farms to be much bigger, get out there faster with fewer materials, perhaps fewer direct jobs in actually laying out the solar panels to drive the costs down? But all of those innovations, the Toyota, if you think about what Toyota did for the car manufacturing industry, we want to do that for the solar installation industry. We've got fantastic companies in Australia doing this already. 5B Solar is the standout example in Australia looking at that, but there may be many others, and we want to bring people forward to working on that integration and installation goal. And if we can do those two things, we can have ultra low cost solar generation, which will benefit both the electricity system, driving down the costs of electricity, as well as creating that opportunity to produce hydrogen and run heavy industrial processes with renewable electricity.
Well, that's a great segue to moving to the heavy industrial processes. So we've had a lot of questions about renewable hydrogen, and you mentioned that ARENA has already invested over $160 million in renewable hydrogen. So what are the next steps for growing Australia's hydrogen industry, and what are the main challenges for commercialising hydrogen?
So we've been, as I said, operating in this renewable hydrogen space for about 3 years now, and we will continue to lead the way because it's not commercial yet. We think that we could probably produce renewable hydrogen today at $6 to $9 a kilogram, and we need to get that down to $2 a kilogram to reach the government's targets, and probably closer to $1 a kilogram over time to create that giant export opportunity and to switch to green steel using hydrogen. So we need to continue to invest in both the supply side, and ARENA is very focused on trying to scale up the supply side to bring those costs down. But working on the demand side is equally important. And there's so many end uses for hydrogen, and now many people will have their own views about which end uses will require hydrogen, which will be electric, and where there'll be other solutions. But that is something for the market to determine over time as we grow the supply side of the industry. And we're keenly working with both the supply and demand side to prove out the use of hydrogen in new use cases.
Thank you. And I wonder if you might take a stab at this question on how far off are we from seeing hydrogen be commercially viable at scale?
Yeah, look, so it depends on what side of the bed you wake up on any given day as to how optimistic you're feeling. But I think at the very minimum, it's going to take 5 years before we get real confidence that these costs are coming down to the levels we want, and probably more realistically a decade. But let me just caveat all that by saying nobody knows how to forecast energy and the electricity system. The history of this industry is that we get it wrong all the time, systemically wrong. We underestimate the potential of technology to improve, to get confidence from that, for the world to jump onto that and to scale that. And that's what gives me hope that actually things could happen quicker if we just put our shoulder to the wheel and push harder.
Indeed. So let's look at some of the new areas where you will be doing exactly that. Low emissions aluminium and steel are two of those new areas for ARENA, and we've had questions on those around what technologies will ARENA be investing in regarding particularly low emissions aluminium and steel, and how does this build on what you've done in the mining sector?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So yeah, these are new areas for us. We have been actually working in the space for a little while now, anticipating where we wanted to head. We've been working with the aluminium industry in particular so far, and particularly the alumina industry, which is the refining part of the supply chain or the value chains for aluminium. So you go from the mine to the refinery, which makes alumina, and then alumina goes to the smelter. And we all know of the likes of Tomago, and the challenges that they have switching to renewable energy at the smelter side. We've already invested $11 million with Alcoa in a project to switch part of their alumina process from using natural gas to using electricity and being much more efficient about that process. And it's the likes of those kinds of electrification opportunities in the alumina refinery process, as well as the potential use of hydrogen, that could be important. And in the area of green steel, I mean, I think we just have to realize that this is just such an incredibly huge industry for Australia. Iron ore, which is our largest export, Australia produces 40% of the world's iron ore, which is the key ingredient in producing steel. All of that goes, most of that goes overseas to be combined with coking coal in a highly energy and emissions intensive process to produce steel. To get to net zero, all of that needs to be zero carbon, and hydrogen is viewed as one of the key pathways to upgrading iron ore into a precursor product, direct reduced iron it's called, which can then go into a green steel making process. Now, Australia could be a leading player in actually using its renewable resources in Australia to upgrade that iron ore to that higher value direct reduced iron process, adding economic value, adding jobs, taking out emissions, and really replacing what will ultimately be the loss to some extent of those export industries we rely on today.
Thank you. So that's answered one of the other questions about the potential that the decarbonisation of steel or green steel brings for the Australian economy. And you've talked about this middle value-added product, taking the iron ore to the higher value DRI or pure iron, as I've heard you describe it. And that in itself is a huge value opportunity even before it's made into the steel.
Yeah, and it's exactly, I mean, as I said, we're 40% of the world's iron ore. We make 0.3% of the world's steel. So we're 130 times more impactful in what we do in the iron industry than what we do in the steel industry. And I don't see Australia producing 40% of the world's steel one day. So we must be focused on the iron ore commodity, and we must be focused on the pathway that will take to get to net zero. We can opt to have others do that offshore, wherever they make steel, or we could choose to lean in and look at doing that in Australia and adding value here. And that's what we choose to do.
And you've painted a really helpful picture and helped people draw the links between the focus on renewable hydrogen, which we already discussed, and how that stream of your focus is in fact what helps drive this potential here of turning the iron ore into the direct reduced iron through the use of that renewable hydrogen itself, as well as the renewable hydrogen helping your being linked to your solar 30/30 goal.
And without wanting to answer a question that you're going to ask me before you ask it, Anna, I think it's becoming clear that all of these things are so interrelated. These are not, I mean, we have created these themes to be focused and so that we can work with the industries required. But actually getting low-cost solar at that $15 a megawatt hour to produce low-cost hydrogen to make those green iron precursors in Australia, it's all interlinked. You can't do one without the other. And that's why it's so important to think about what that end goal is and work backwards to the technologies and inputs required to make that happen, which is the work that we've done.
That would be a terrific point to end on. We've got a few other questions. And so I will invite the audience to note that it is 1 o'clock, and if you had to leave, by all means, do so. The ARENA team have offered to stay online for a few more minutes, and if you're able to, Darren, we had a couple more questions. One linked to that integration point, perhaps, and then a couple more about your new mandate and the new technologies, and then we will have covered what's been a really rich set. The questions are still coming, but we will not keep you here forever. The integration or interrelated point is linked to a few questions around, you've already answered that you don't pre-allocate to each different priority, but would you look at proposals outside of these priorities?
It's a really good question, and the answer is yes, we would, but to the extent it sits within our mission, right? So I think that's why I spent a bit of time outlining what is it that ARENA can do and what's our viewpoint. And our viewpoint is that global emissions reduction and Australia's role in that and technology's role in making that happen. So if somebody has an idea that ticks those boxes, we're not the font of all knowledge about what's possible. And so people are welcome to come to us with their ideas, but we will judge it through the lens of what we're aiming for. I often say just because something can be done doesn't mean it should be done. Not every technology has the opportunity to get to commerciality. And we do take a very commercial and rigorous approach to the technologies we are prepared to support. We have limited time, limited capacity, and ultimately, although it's a big budget, it's a limited budget, and we must make the best use of that. And so we make tough choices every day.
And while we're on the topic of what expands from what you've done already, perhaps, there's a question on, will ARENA have scope for delivering support via mechanisms other than grants, for example, direct equity or specialist low emission technology investment funds?
So the government did announce its intention to give ARENA additional mechanisms to provide funding. So as you said, right now we're a granting agency. We are consulting with the Minister about what that might look like, but in the future it's possible that ARENA will be able to invest concessional equity and concessional debt up to, there's a cap of $50 million that's allocated to that. And so in certain circumstances where we think that it's more appropriate to provide our funding in the form of that concessional debt or equity, or in combination with our grants, we'll look to do that.
Thank you. I might move to, there were a few questions about your new mandate, which was recently expanded by regulation. So could you talk about these legislation changes and how it impacts what you'll be focusing on?
Yeah, so that's correct. So recently the government introduced through regulations the ability for ARENA to broaden its scope beyond renewable energy into carbon capture and storage and soil carbon technologies are the two that I mentioned earlier. And these are new areas for us. It's only just happened that the regulation came into effect. So we've been working in the background quietly on getting ourselves up to speed on what the opportunities might be in carbon capture and storage and soil carbon technologies. And these are conversations we'll have internally and with key stakeholders in the beginning. And once we have a clear pathway as to what the best use of our time and funding is into these areas, we'll be engaging with the industry. So I'd say, stay tuned and come to ARENA if you have something to add or share with us about what the opportunities might be. But I think we also need to be aware that we shouldn't be afraid of a broad set of technologies. It's going to require a lot of innovation in many different areas to get to net zero. And I'm not sitting here today saying that renewable energy will get us 100% of the way there. There may be bits left over. We're taking carbon out of the atmosphere, and improving our soils and storing carbon in our soils could be a valuable thing to do to achieve our net zero ambitions. So our minds are open to that, and we're working hard on looking at those opportunities.
Terrific. And I should remind the audience, there have been some questions about the video of this. It is being recorded, and yes, the recording of this event will be on the ARENA website. And I might try to bring things to a close with an open question, which I think is from your audience to your audience, and that is, what can we do to drive new innovations by supporting clean tech startups?
Yeah, startups are crucial to the success of our economy. I mean, I just gave you one clear example with SunDrive today. These young guys coming out of UNSW, Vince and David, who through Vince's PhD came up with this idea to replace silver in solar modules with copper, and they've now beaten the world record held by Longi, a $100 billion market cap company in China. And these young guys in a garage in Cronulla, in a warehouse in Cronulla, have beaten that record. So there's a proof point from today that we just mentioned about how startups are crucial to the success. We need to invest in startups. We need to invest not just money, but time in helping them, in mentoring them, in bringing them together and collaborating. And I would encourage anybody who is passionate about solving what is the biggest challenge we are facing to get involved, start a business, invest in a business, and help people who are looking to innovate in this area. It's so important.
Well, thank you. I do think that's a great message to end on. There are a continuing list of questions which I think your team can take away as it applies very much to the technologies that you've discussed and going into greater level of detail. People asking about building integrated solar PV, people asking about retrofitting thermal storage at thermal asset sites to leverage stranded assets, people asking about the Future Fuels Fund. I think you can be very encouraged about the interest in your work. There's been questions about the soil carbon and the CCS, and you mentioned you're engaging deeply there, and we'll be learning and watch this space. So I think it's been a pleasure for me to help your audience watch you and learn about your space very much. And I know they would join me in thanking you, not just for the presentation, but for the work that you do. You, Darren, you, Justin, the chair, your collaborators such as AEMO, whose CEO we heard from, Daniel, and the board and the staff of ARENA who deploy these resources, not just through their dollars, but with deep passion and interest and skill and capability, and it really is a national asset. So thank you from all of us to you. And to the audience today, the investment plan that Darren has presented is now online on the ARENA website, and that is where you will also find the recording of today's event. That concludes our proceedings. Thank you very much to all of you, and do take up Darren's offer to stay involved, be engaged and support these innovations, and let's achieve these goals and bring forth that hope that we accelerate to the extent required. Let's go for it. Thank you.